As Devin pointed out, is not the total number of tariffs that have been collected, but that is a really significant number. And now we'll have to see what happens to all of that money that the Trump administration has been touting as revenue for the federal government.
And I want to bring in Chief White House correspondent Mary Bruce on this, too, because, Mary, what does this mean for the White House now? Not only was this a centerpiece of President Trump's economic agenda, but he also touted all these deals that he negotiated using these tariffs as leverage. So what now?
Yeah, he used these tariffs as really the main pressure point and leverage, as you say, to negotiate a host of economic deals and also, other foreign policy. Everything from touting that these tariffs helped him to negotiate peace deals to lowering prescription drug costs. What now happens to all of these deals and policies that have come about because of these tariffs as a point of leverage is a huge question going forward. So is, as Elizabeth was just mentioning, what of the question of refunds? The president has often touted that his tariffs are bringing in billions of dollars to the U.S. Treasury. How will that money be returned? What will that look like? This is a massive, devastating, and consequential blow for this administration. It's also a rare rebuke of Trump by the Supreme Court, something that we haven't really seen so far much in this second term. Now, we haven't heard any response from the president, but he himself has described this as the most important and consequential decision ever made by the Supreme Court. Just yesterday, the president quite frustrated in saying that he'd been waiting for this decision. And again, he was adamant in speaking to reporters just yesterday that he has the right to do this as president. But the court today clearly disagreeing, saying only Congress has the authority to impose these kinds of tariffs. Now, the White House has suggested that they could find workarounds to these tariffs, but there is no question that this really kneecaps this administration and much of what they've been trying to do, both economically and abroad.
And I want to bring in our chief Washington correspondent, too. John, the timing's interesting here. Just a few days before the State of the Union, when the president will address the nation with the justices there, front and center, basically. What do you make of that timing?
Look, extraordinary, and it will be an extraordinary moment in the House chamber as the president delivers that State of the Union address with the justices. They don't usually all go, but there will almost certainly be some of the justices in attendance. You can imagine that the president will likely directly look at them as he addresses this issue. He's been warning for months that if the Supreme Court struck down his tariffs, that it would have devastating consequences for the country, not just economic consequences, but also consequences for U.S. foreign policy. This president has seen tariffs as an instrument that goes far beyond economics, as a way to pressure countries to do what he wants them to do. One extraordinary example, tariffs were imposed on Brazil, a country that the United States actually has a trade surplus with. And Trump, through his statements on social media, suggested it was because he didn't like the way Brazil was dealing with its former president, Trump's ally, Bolsonaro. Interesting reasoning for tariffs. What the decision makes clear is that in the view of a sizable majority of this Supreme Court, that the president does not have the authority to impose tariffs unilaterally unless he has explicit authorization from Congress to do so. He did not have explicit authorization in the vast majority of the tariffs that he has imposed, and they have now struck it down. He is going to be very angry about it, and I suspect we will see that anger manifested in the Supreme Court. I'm sorry, in the State of the Union address on Tuesday.
John, given how quick he has been to use tariffs in various negotiations with various countries, as you point out, what are his options now?
Well, he has options to go through and work under existing authorities. This does not knock down all of his tariffs that are imposed for specific national security issues. The steel and aluminum tariffs, for instance, still remain in force. So he may try to use those existing authorities to reimpose some of the tariffs that are just now knocked down, but he's not going to be able to do it for all of them. And it's going to be a complicated process. And one thing you cannot do to a Supreme Court decision is appeal it. This Supreme Court decision is final.
All right, John, thank you. And let's bring in ABC News legal analyst, former Trump administration official Sarah Isgur. Sarah, what stands out to you about the way the justices made this ruling and how this came down?
Big picture, we're seeing Chief Justice John Roberts navigate the Supreme Court through treacherous times, partisan times, where both parties are trying to pull the court into their food fights. And we saw during the Biden administration when the court struck down their student loan debt forgiveness, executive action. This is very similar in terms of the reasoning of the court, saying you can't go back to an old, vague statute that Congress passed decades ago and pour into it new, big executive power. If you want to have your policy agenda, you need to work through Congress to do it. The court is simply not going to be refereeing these fights. Work it out with Congress, compromise with the other side to get legislation passed. And really, by shrinking the presidency, you can see the Supreme Court under Chief Justice Roberts trying to get itself out of these big partisan fights and make the two other branches actually hash this out moving forward. And again, we see this court not as a 6-3 conservative court, but as a 6-3 court with conservatives in dissent. Once again, last term, it was actually split. Of the 6-3 cases, they were closely divided with 5-4 included. Half of those were 6-3 with only liberals in dissent, and half of those were 6-3 with only conservatives in dissent. So clearly that trend is continuing as well.
So, Devin, if the tariffs are illegal, what's the court saying about refunds?
Question, Diane, the $142 billion question. The Supreme Court's majority didn't say much about it, but Justice Brett Kavanaugh, in one of the dissenting opinions, declared that this is going to be one big mess in his view. There is some precedent several decades ago of the government having to issue some limited refunds, of this kind of tariffs to importers in an entirely different case and context, but nothing has ever been seen on this scale in the United States government. And we have heard on the record from Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent in recent months that this is going to be a very complicated, slow, drawn-out process. But I'm already hearing, Diane, from the coalition of small businesses that brought this case, many of them Republican-owned, they feel that these have been illegal taxes and they want their money back. And some of those claimants, Diane, include big American businesses. Costco, tops among them, already filed suit recently seeking those refunds. We'll have to see what the government says today about how that process will begin.
Elizabeth, how are the markets reacting?
Oh, Diane, initially saw a tick up in markets. We see the Dow now up 180 points. You can actually look at that chart and see that we were negative to open today when this decision from the Supreme Court came out. Stocks did trade higher, and now we're up about almost 200 points on the Dow. Look, the market wanted this decision. The investors have not liked these new costs on companies that they pay when they import products. Anytime we've gotten news that effectively rolls back tariffs, we have seen a positive reaction in markets, though it's worth noting this is not a huge spike. A lot of investors, traders, analysts did expect this could be coming. They thought that there was the justification for these tariffs from the president would get struck down. So that might be why you're not seeing, say a 500-point move or higher in the Dow right now. The question then for businesses is what this does for the bottom line. And it's not just the refunds, which Devin was just talking about. It's also the idea, Diane, that this does eliminate some uncertainty for companies going forward. I was just talking to one trader who said this is good news for big and small companies because it makes it less likely that we will see these sweeping across the board tariffs put in place that really upend their bottom line, their business model, and any ability to plan based on how back and forth this has been over the last few months. If the president does not have this authority to kind of put these tariffs in place and has to use more targeted measures, that is a big that reduces some of the overhang that we've seen on businesses costs. That said, a lot of investors and companies I've talked to do expect that the administration will find other ways to put tariffs in place. There are other laws that allow them to do more targeted tariffs on industries. We've already seen them do that with Section 232, for example, on steel. Very likely we will see the administration come out with some of those other plans. They've been hinting at that. Treasury officials we've talked to are already preparing to find other ways to put tariffs in place. So it doesn't mean that the tariff threat is completely gone here for businesses, Diane.
And Devin, Justices Thomas Kavanaugh and Alito all dissented here. What is this decision saying about the court itself?
Yeah, it's really interesting, Diane. I mean, this is a 6-justice conservative majority. 3 of the justices were handpicked by Donald Trump himself. And as we've been reporting over the past few months, actually the entirety of the first year of Trump's second term, they've been hugely deferential to the president. I mean, think of the decisions in which they've greenlit some of the dramatic changes that Donald Trump has made to the federal government and to the country. But not today. This is a significant, the most significant marker that this court has put down on Donald Trump's expansive push for presidential power, and it included 2 of his appointees, Amy Coney Barrett, Neil Gorsuch, joining with the other conservatives and the liberals in blocking the president here, and it comes on the heels, Diane, late last year of another blow, blocking his deployment of National Guard troops. So this is not a Supreme Court that is a rubber stamp for Donald Trump by any means.
All right, Devin Dwyer, Mary Bruce, Sarah Isger, John Carl, Elizabeth Schelsey, thank you all. And thank you for watching. I'm Diane Macedo. The news never stops, and neither do we. We have a lot more news after the break. Stay with us.
All across America.
Good morning. Hello.
Wherever we are.
Welcome. It's good to be home.
It feels like home.
Hi.
When's the last time we dropped our things and went? Woke up somewhere that we've both never been. Growing up doesn't mean
Good morning. How are you?
At the start of the day, letting us into your home, putting the good in your morning.
Man, it's good to be home.
GMA. It's an invitation to come together. Brighten your morning.
I'm George. How are you?
And the day ahead.
When this view is over, there's a whole other view just getting started.
Hello. Hello.
From backstage secrets.
No, that's not what I said.
That's what you said. Oh, my God.
To the views you didn't get to hear.
I was blown away.
We're playing with fire here.
Why are so many people listening to the Views Behind the Table podcast?
I can't imagine you can keep all of that.
Because nothing's off limits behind the table. Subscribe and listen now wherever you get your podcasts.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Weekend View.
Streaming every Saturday and Sunday, it's an all-new View.
Tell us more. Yes.
Catch the Weekend View.
This show is crazy on the weekend.
Streaming weekends on ABC News Live.
Tuesday night from the nation's capital, President Trump before the American people and the world. With so much at stake, America turns to David Muir and ABC News, the State of the Union. Tuesday night on ABC and stream on Disney Plus and Hulu.
ABC News Live.
Because the news never stops.
Okay, we want to know, who are the people in your state that make such a big difference?
Come on now. We all know someone who does so much.
And we want to celebrate them with you. So scan this QR code or go to goodmorningamerica.com. Tell us about them.
We're coming to all 50 states in 50 weeks to celebrate the best of what makes America beautiful.
Hi, I'm Diane Macedo. Let's get right to breaking news. The Supreme Court just struck down most of President Trump's global tariffs. It's a significant loss for the president on the centerpiece of his economic agenda. The president had said a ruling against him would be an economic body blow to the country, and now the justices are defying him in a landmark ruling, saying he doesn't have the authority to impose those tariffs. Let's get right to ABC senior Washington reporter Devin Dwyer, who covers the Supreme Court for us. Hi, Devin. So the Trump administration argued that the International Emergency Economic Powers Act authorizes the president to impose tariffs on any country at any level. How are the justices responding to that in this ruling?
They simply rejected that argument, Diane. It was an unprecedented claim. No president has ever done what Donald Trump did with tariffs, collecting more than $142 billion over the first year in office here in his second term. 70% of the tariffs that he's issued were implicated in this case, and today they were struck down. The court's decision was really a dispute about 2 words: regulate importation. When Congress wrote the law in 1977, the act that you referenced, it gave the president some power to regulate importation of goods into the country when there's an emergency, but they never mentioned tariffs. And so what the justices did, and disputed really, because there were 3 dissenting, is what those words mean. Justices Clarence Thomas, Samuel Alito, and Brett Kavanaugh believe that regulate importation is broad enough to include tariffs. They thought that the president should have that power, but clearly a majority of the court, 6 justices, including 2 appointed by Donald Trump, Amy Coney Barrett and Neil Gorsuch, said that's simply not the case. Congress would never have tucked in such a momentous power into a law in 1977 without spelling it out. And so Chief Justice John Roberts, in his opinion, said the law simply doesn't support what the president has asserted, and therefore these tariffs are illegal, Diane.
And I want to bring in ABC's legal contributor, James Sample, on this, because, James, in the decision, the Chief Justice writes that the president must identify clear congressional authorization to exercise his authority on tariffs. What's your take on how they wrote this opinion?
Well, Diane, I think what Devin said is absolutely spot on. And the other thing I would emphasize is that to a certain extent, as complicated and as much legalese as there is in a 170-page opinion from the Supreme Court, there's also a very simple, almost elementary school lesson, which is that shortcuts often comes with consequences. And I think what the court is saying here is that by imposing these tariffs without involving Congress, when Congress has the power to tax and Congress has the power to spend, and a tariff functions very much like a tax, that it is almost inconceivable, according to the majority, that the founders, the framers of the Constitution that gave those powers specifically to Congress would allow a president to use vague, ambiguous, and frankly, a sort of logical stretch of existing statutory authority to impose extraordinary economic consequences very much akin to a tax. And so I think what the court is saying here is it's not that this kind of a tariff scheme couldn't be implemented. That's not what the ruling says. It's that the ruling says this kind of a scheme can't be implemented without going through bicameral passage in Congress and presentment to the president.
Selena, the court is supposed to be apolitical, but there are political ramifications here. What do you make of that aspect of this, given this is a rare rebuke of the president by this court?
Yeah, Diane, I mean, this is a huge blow. It's hard to overstate just how central this tariff policy was, not only to the president's economic policy, but also to his foreign policy, diplomacy overseas. The president really wielded these tariffs as a tool to negotiate with other countries. And for months now, the Trump administration has been warning that this will be extremely damaging for America on the global stage if the Supreme Court were to take away this power from the president. For instance, we have seen Trump use tariffs as a negotiating tool, to force foreign companies to manufacture here in America, to extract concessions, to force them to invest in America. So this is a major blow for the Trump administration that goes far beyond tariffs and the question of whether or not they're going to have to pay back these billions of dollars to these importers. In addition to that, though, the administration has known that this could be a possibility. They have been repeatedly saying for weeks now that they have a plan B. They've got an alternative. We have heard the U.S. Trade Representative talk about how quickly they're going to move to replace these tariffs with other authorities that are not under IEEPA. For instance, there are the Section 232 tariffs that they've used on all sorts of things like steel, aluminum, auto tariffs. They could use that to cover other sectors, but it's unclear, Diane, how long it will take for them to replace those tariffs. This is certainly a more complicated authority than IEEPA, so still a huge blow, but this is not the last that we're going to hear from this administration about tariffs.
I want to bring in ABC's Elizabeth Schulze on the immediate impact because, Elizabeth, what happens now? The government's estimated to have collected over $100 billion from these tariffs. So how do you refund that?
That is the key question, is how is this going to work, Diane? And in the Supreme Court decision, we see this laid out pretty much saying this is likely to be a mess. This says that refunds of billions of dollars would have significant consequences for the U.S. Treasury. An estimate we have from the Yale Budget Lab says we're talking about $142 billion. So when we've talked to businesses, Diane, a lot of these costs, so if you are an importer, you're bringing in a product from another country, a lot of these are basically fees that are automatically deducted in your shipping costs when you bring that product in. Do they use that same kind of infrastructure through the Customs and Border Protection, basically online portal, to send that money back to businesses that they at first took away? So that is kind of one option. And when I talk to businesses, that's how they think it might happen, which in theory could be a process that is pretty quick. The question of where this gets really messy is how much are we talking about? Who's doing the math to kind of calculate where that money is going to go and how much exactly it's owed? And then as businesses are waiting for that, keep in mind that doesn't necessarily mean that consumers are going to get that money either. These are costs that businesses have already paid. If they've been passed down to customers, those are things you've already paid. We're talking about $1,700 for the typical U.S. household from tariffs. Though, if these tariffs go away, that number does get significantly lower. The economists over at Yale Budget Labs say that without IEEPA tariffs, these ones that were struck down by the Supreme Court, we're looking at closer to maybe $500-600, the typical cost of President Trump's tariffs on U.S. households.
And I want to bring in our chief Washington correspondent, John Karl, for a bit of the bigger picture here. What is the bigger impact here for the president, John, given how frequently he leaned on the threat of tariffs to negotiate other deals?
I mean, it is a monumental setback for Donald Trump. I really don't think we can overstate it on a couple of in a couple of ways here. First of all, just consider the Supreme Court itself. Trump has often acted as if at least the justices that he put on the Supreme Court should be doing his bidding. And the Supreme Court has backed him up in a number of significant ways, of course, over the past year. But this, I would argue, is the most important decision for Trump's policy overall, and the Supreme Court said flatly no. An overwhelming decision, 6-3. Two of the justices he put on the court doing that, and it comes not long after the Supreme Court also struck down his ability to send in the National Guard to cities to basically participate in crime fighting operations. So this shows that this Supreme Court is not simply a rubber stamp for Donald Trump, but more broadly on the issue of tariffs. Donald Trump has seen tariffs as central to his presidency. And by the way, this is one of the issues that he has been consistent on throughout his time in politics and before he ever ran for office. His belief that tariffs should be imposed on America's trading partners because, in his view, America's getting a raw deal. Well, what he learned in this decision is something that you could have read right in the Constitution, that the Constitution gives Congress the power to impose duties and taxes, not the president. And he was going about imposing tariffs on virtually every country in the world, negotiating trade deals and putting them in force without any congressional approval or authorization. Those now have to be unwound, it seems to me. Not just the refunds that will theoretically need to be given to companies and individuals that have already paid tariffs, but what about about a dozen trade deals that Trump has negotiated or frameworks that he has spent time negotiating? It seems to me that all of those would now need, or most of them at least, would need congressional authorization to go into effect. The way things, by the way, usually work. When you think about the big trade deals that have been negotiated over the past several decades, the Mexico-Canada Free Trade Agreement that Trump himself negotiated in his first term was approved by Congress. It replaced NAFTA, which was approved by Congress. Didn't go into effect until it was approved by Congress. So major implications for the president's economic policy, for what he can expect from this Supreme Court, and for the way he has conducted foreign policy as well.
And Devin, you say the dissent in this ruling is notable. Why?
Well, first of all, it involves one of President Trump's handpicked justices, as John Karl was just speaking about, extraordinary in its own right. On something of this scale, to see him rebuke or rather support the president, only one of them there, Brett Kavanaugh, in his corner. The two others, of course, signing with the majority. So that was sort of significant to see. A lot of people expected the Trump appointees would side with Trump. But what's also notable here, Diane, is how much Brett Kavanaugh's dissent leans into the practical implications. Nowhere in the court's decision do they talk about the practical impact of having to refund all these tariffs, what it will mean for the economy, the government, the trade deals, the foreign negotiations. But Brett Kavanaugh does. And he really emphasizes the point that this is going to be a mess. It could upend trade deals. There's really no way, of really gauging the entirety of the scope of this thing in the short term. And that was one of the factors he indicated, that for why he would have upheld the tariffs, and he eventually lost that vote.
James, you also say this ruling will be a big part of Justice Roberts' legacy. How so?
Well, Diane, to the point that Chief Justice Roberts here, the Supreme Court has been extraordinarily willing during the Chief Justice Roberts Court era to uphold presidential discretion, and that's been especially true in matters of national security. If you think about from travel bans to border emergencies, the Roberts Court has shown a readiness to grant presidents wide latitude in matters that involve foreign affairs abroad that it usually denies to domestic agencies and in terms of domestic powers at home. Chief Justice Roberts has been very much on board with that trend. But here, this is him drawing a line, even though the administration argued that, and IEPA certainly as a statutory matter, the statute at issue here allows presidential action in response to, and the term that the statute uses is an unusual and extraordinary threat. And the administration argued that the trade imbalances constituted just such a threat, and that modern, supply side and globalized supply chains in economics have turned trade imbalances, the administration argued, into genuine security risks. But the court and Chief Justice Roberts draw a line and say, look, chronic economic conditions are not unusual. While they may be serious, they're not unusual because they are in fact chronic. And Chief Justice Roberts draws a line with respect to presidential authority, and not a line that he has typically been known for, but here he sets a very firm precedent.
All right, Devin Dwyer, Selena Wang, James Sample, John Carl, and Elizabeth Schulze, thank you. And a slavery exhibit at Philadelphia's Independence Hall is now restored. Last month, the National Park Service removed panels that detailed the lives of 9 people George Washington enslaved while president. The agency says it removed the exhibit after the Trump administration called the panels disparaging. But this week, a judge ordered the Trump administration to reinstall the exhibit. The federal government is appealing. Coming up, a new report on menopausal hormone treatment, why it could have more benefits than first thought.
All across America.
Good morning. Hello.
Wherever we are.
Welcome. It's good to be home.
It feels like home.
Hi. When's the last time we dropped our things and went? Woke up somewhere that we both never been. Growing up doesn't mean
Good morning. How are you?
At the start of the day, letting us into your home. Putting the good in your morning.
Man, it's good to be home.